Okay, it says we are live. So, as usual, I just expect everybody to let me know if I actually am or not. But I am glad to be back here. Obviously, I had to take last week off. I had some good stuff going on here at the house, and I just wanted to keep that rolling. So, sometimes we got to prioritize what we have going on in our lives besides just doing a live stream, right? So, I appreciate all of your patience. Thank you so much for being here. And we have a lot to get into tonight, but we're not going to get into too much detail. We're going to talk about why time is almost up in the sense of this whole conflict escalating. We are definitely on our way to seeing some rather negative things here in the future, at least in my opinion. And I don't want to see these things happen, but we have to be very aware of what's going on in the world right now because things are not normal. This is not routine, and this is not something that should just be happening on our regular basis. We are witnessing the beginnings of something very substantial. And I think that a lot of us have already grown some normalcy bias to it because of the existence of the conflict overseas going on for so long at this point in time that it almost just feels like part of existence, right? Like, well, yeah, read the news today. There's some stuff happening over there again, as usual. Nothing crazy has happened here. Things are getting more expensive. So we'll just kind of move on about our day. But we honestly need to be real about the situation and understand that the threat of at least bare minimum NATO and the US getting involved in a conventional war between major superpowers is becoming a lot more probable. And at the bare minimum, the idea of a nuclear event is definitely on the table. And this is something that we have to really understand is a reality. We can't just gloss it over, which is the easy thing to do. The Prepping Mantis, good to see you. Honeybee is here as well. Good to see you. Oath Taker 276. Live in Life. We've got Little Cy, Vincent Boogaloo, Survival Behind Liberal Lines, Ultimate Cheeseburger, Genius 85, and Kim's Rural Life. Good to see everybody. John P, thanks for being here. Exile Reviews, thank you for modding tonight. I appreciate it. And understand that before we get started tonight, which we will here in just a second, doing our usual routine of just going over some recent events that have occurred and things that we need to be aware of so we can understand the correlation of how close we are to some of these events actually spiraling out of control. I want everyone here to be aware of the fact that, Janet Nice, you're here too, and I appreciate it. I want everyone to be aware of the fact that it's easier to dismiss things than it is to say that they're a possibility, right? And I just want to go over that really quickly because the dismissal is not helpful. It doesn't benefit anybody. So I can more easily tell you guys right now from this position and just say, hey, just so you guys know, the likelihood of someone using a nuclear weapon is like 0.0001%. So just don't care about it or worry about it, right? And in most situations, I would probably end up being right because that's the easy way out, right? But honestly, we have to look at things from what's possible and what's becoming more likely, and then just admitting that this is becoming more of a likely reality, and then adapting to that and preparing for it, rather than just writing it off because that's the easier thing to do, which it really is. And in most cases, people will be correct by just saying, they won't use nukes no matter what. So there you go, right? There you have it. So most people will just say, well, that's right. And then that's an easy way out. But I kind of want to look at that from the same lens as being, I don't know, being liberal and living in San Francisco, right? That's the easy thing to do. You don't want to stir the pot and everybody pats you on the back. So there you are. And it's just like, being ultra conservative in, small town Oklahoma. This is just how things work. So the easy way out is to say this won't happen. So we have to take the contradictory route and say, there's a good chance this could happen, at least higher probability than there has been in a long time, which means we have to take the situation more seriously. That's just my 2 cents. Village Idiot, it's not an original. It is like a painting replica, and you guys voted on it way back in the day when we first started these live streams. So I appreciate you guys picking that Red Dawn out for me here in the background. Never forget Wolverines. Now, Mark Fallows, thank you so much. Always supporting the channel. Oida Tudian, good to see you. Amanda Pantano, good to see you as well from Pennsylvania. And then Gregor Zamina says, only a full dismiss is a possibility for the sake of impossibility, right? And that's kind of how I want to approach this. What's the point of writing it off as not being possible when everything is showing us that it's becoming more likely? It doesn't help anything. It's the easy way out. Don't take the easy way out. That's not how preparedness works. Otherwise, we wouldn't prepare at all. The easy way out is to wait for the government to come save you. So if you're down for the easy way out, just call FEMA and you'll be fine. Now, first thing on the list, let's talk about what's happening over there in Eastern Europe right now, okay? We have a lot of interesting stuff that happened literally just today. And then we also just need to kind of analyze some of the other things happening in that region. So Kiev, Lviv, and other Ukrainian cities rocked by blast. We know that that's what happened today. And this is obviously, or I guess not obviously, but supposedly retaliation for that bridge attack, the bridge that linked Russia and Crimea. Now, let's see. I'll just go through this really quick because I don't want to, misrepresent what's the article's trying to get at here. But several explosions rocked the Ukrainian capital Kiev and the cities of Lviv, Ternopil, and Dnipro on Monday after Russia accused Ukraine of orchestrating a powerful blast that damaged a key bridge linking Russia and Crimea. And if you weren't aware of that, basically there was some kind of an attack on the bridge that damaged the roadway as well as lit some train containers on fire. And of course, the damage from that is being minimalized from Russian state media because in all honesty, it makes them look bad for any amount of damage that there is. So whatever they can try to use to their advantage in the sense of looking better, they probably will. Okay. Now, several explosions in the Shevenskyivsky district. See, bear with me here. I speak Spanish and I speak English pretty well, but not Ukrainian or Russian or anything like that. So I'm doing my best here, okay? In the center of the capital, okay? And I just totally filled an entire sentence in between those. But basically what we have to understand is that the cities are being attacked right now, and it's in retaliation for what happened to that bridge. Now, the reason that matters is because people are being targeted and so is infrastructure. And now that's coming out of Ukraine, right? That's what they're claiming, which is true because these are the targets that are being hit. So Zelensky says Russia is targeting civilians and energy infrastructure. Now, collateral damage is always part of war. It doesn't matter which side you're on. If you're in a war, there is collateral damage and you have to expect there to be so. And we also understand that, even when we had the invasion of Iraq and during our occupation of Afghanistan and stuff like that, I mean, there was collateral damage. It's just part of how things work. You can't really do much about it in the sense of warring nations. Things will happen that maybe not everybody wanted to have happen. However, these strikes are definitely in population centers and are definitely targeting infrastructure within those centers. So this would look like an escalation, especially in the sense of a retaliatory attack based on the fact that Russian infrastructure connecting Crimea to Russia was also attacked. So you can kind of see the quid pro quo or the eye for an eye going on here. Now, power facilities around the country were also targeted in a wave of attacks that left at least 8 people reported dead in Kiev. Okay, so one of the reasons why we have to look at this and understand what's happening here, and this was deadly missile and drone attacks that happened today, is that infrastructure is on the table, especially in a wartime scenario. I think we all understand here as preppers that if we find ourselves in a global conflict with other countries, especially major superpowers, their best bet of having some kind of a win over the United States of America will be to target the infrastructure. Obviously, our power grid is very weak and has a lot of fragile points of target. And we also know that at the end of the day, it's probably the easiest attack to pull off, especially if we're considering things like EMP. But don't underestimate the power of a cyber attack either, which I think we're seeing more and more of those here happening. I know there was a Russian group that claimed a cyber attack over some U.S. airlines just today, taking down their websites and whatnot. But I mean, those are minor things at the end of the day when you compare them to actual infrastructure being affected, aka the power grid, the water supply, anything else related to what we need in order to run our daily lives. So that being said, this is what you should expect in modern warfare. Infrastructure will go down, and the people in that area are dealing with the fact that infrastructure is completely unreliable, and most of the time not even on the table. So we have to at least learn from these scenarios and understand what the enemy's MO would be. Now, we're watching a near-peer adversary here attack another country that has modernized weaponry and has modernized quality of life in the sense of what people are used to having in the sense of amenities, I guess. But that gives us some data and some points to work with when it comes to what they're targeting, how they're reacting to it, what even Ukraine is doing to try to deal with it in the sense of how they're getting things back online and how they're helping people get through these situations. So there's a lot to learn from the situation. As terrible as it is, this conflict should not be happening, and nobody, especially the innocent civilian on the ground who has nothing to do with what their government decides to do or not, should be suffering through any of this. So that's the biggest issue we have with these types of events, is that innocent people die and have to suffer in the process just so people at the top can get their way. Okay. Let's see. Vault Dweller says, after dealing with Hurricane Ian and having no power for days, I can say SHTF ain't fun at all. Now imagine that for months or even years, not fun. And the interesting part about that is that, we've seen that in places like Puerto Rico, which is a U.S. territory, with Hurricane Maria, when Puerto Rico didn't have power for months and months. So it can happen here, even if it's not in a conflict. But understand that if there is a conflict, you better expect infrastructure to not work properly. That's just what I'm taking from this. And I'm also understanding that this is an escalation of this war because we are literally watching them attack things that the standard everyday person needs in order to get by in their daily lives. Okay. Let's just read this real quick. This is from Zelensky. And, I don't always agree with everything this guy has to say because there's a lot of things happening there right now, especially in the sense of censorship and the media being taken over by the state and a lot of interesting things going on. But these are the pieces of information that we're being given. So we have to at least use the information that we have. This morning is difficult. We are dealing with terrorists, dozens of missiles and Iranian Shaheds. They have two targets, energy facilities throughout the country. And the second target is people, right? So obviously any kind of, let's just say, any kind of sympathy they can get from these situations are going to try to get, because Zelensky's job right now, and if you're in the government of Ukraine, your job right now is to get as many sympathetic countries on your side as humanly possible and to get as much support, both financially and equipment-wise, on your side so you can get what you need in order to keep this conflict moving forward rather than having to retreat or surrender or anything else along those lines. So I understand the purpose behind it, but I also understand that that's what we're being shown as well. Now, the other thing you have to keep in mind when it comes to these situations is we're being shown what we are being shown. So always remember that. It's not always so easy to just say, well, this is what's happening because that's what the pictures show, and this is what's happening because that's the videos I saw. It's not always that easy. People are more than willing to manipulate these situations for their own benefit. And we have to honestly always keep that front and center when it comes to these scenarios. What happens in wartime? The biggest thing ever, propaganda, right? And just so you guys are aware, I'm saying a lot of words tonight that are specifically known to not be algorithmically friendly. Even that word's not. So, because for some reason when you mention it, it doesn't like it. It's like it wants to be secret or something, What's that whole thing with the biggest, dang, I don't want to say this the wrong way, but the biggest accomplishment the devil ever pulled off was getting everyone to believe he didn't exist or something like that. I think that's like what's going on there with the algorithm. But because we're saying all these words and we're covering this topic, which is not necessarily the most, let's just say, valued thing on this platform, I appreciate if you guys can ever help me out with getting the word out, sharing it, and all that stuff. I don't usually ask for that, but I just know how these conversations go, and I know how our community is being treated right now with some of the stuff that's happening. So I just want to keep everybody front and center when it comes to that. Let's see. Bees Nuts says, it's hard to know what to believe, and that's the fog of war, right? So we all have to do our best to kind of read between the lines and piecemeal the information into a digestible, information meal. So that way we can actually understand, or at least have a better understanding as to what's really happening. It is difficult. And there's reasons why I still listen to everyone, regardless of their opinion or the ideology and stuff behind it, because it gives me enough different perspectives where if you can mirror some things and you can cross-reference some things, you can say, okay, there seems to be this similar factor that keeps coming up. So I have to assume there's some relevance to that, right? Okay, now, Roaming Prepper, good to see you. Glad you're here. We have Lily Bishop here as well. And John Doe, you're very welcome. No problem at all. Now, just some dude says defund the ATF. We might need to in order to send as much money as we're sending over to Ukraine right now. So I think that's a great idea. We defund the ATF and some of these other unnecessary bureaucracies and take all of that savings and send it to Ukraine, because now the people who want to keep the ATF in place can't really argue that now, can they? And you know what? Don't get me wrong. I think there's a time and a place for certain government authority to keep an eye on people who are working with explosives and stuff like that maybe they're trying to use in a very negative way. I understand the reasoning behind it, but I think we can consolidate some of that down to like a singular force. I don't know. And I don't want to say the FBI because they have a pretty bad track record at the top right now. And when I say that, I definitely want to make sure everyone knows, like, there's a lot of field agents and stuff out there that are just trying to do a job, I'm sure. So it is what it is, right? Now, let's talk about what else happened today in those strikes. Now, these strikes from Russia, they clearly have an MO, but I think if you want to look at it from this perspective, a lot of it looks like posturing in the sense of trying to raise morale, right? They hit us, they hit our infrastructure, they hit our bridge. So we're going to show our people that we mean business and we're not going to just take that, right? So it was almost like a forced situation. Like they had to do something. If they did nothing, they would look weak. If they did nothing, it would look like Ukraine was winning even more than it seems like they are in some ways already. So, and when I say seems like, I mean that because Russia is a major nuclear superpower. So I think they can only win as far as they are allowed to win until they're not winning anymore. And that's just me trying to be logical and emotionless when discussing the situation, right? But strikes that went off today, missile strikes in Kiev hit the German consulate. So this should tell you guys some things, because what we're talking about now is the possibility of other countries being dragged into this conflict, whether or not they want to be. Okay, now this consulate building was supposedly empty and has been empty for months. But at the end of the day, this is a German consulate that has now been damaged by Russian missile strikes, okay? So we have to understand that, yes, there's collateral damage. Infrastructure is being targeted. Innocent civilians are dying. But we also have other countries' assets being targeted as well. Targeted, maybe. I mean, we don't know how accurate these strikes are. It could be that this missile hit the consulate without it meaning to hit the consulate. I don't know. If you want to listen to some people's considerations of what Russia's military is capable of, then incompetence is their number one weapon. So it's possible they did it on accident. Then it's also very possible that they did it on purpose. So let's talk about that here in just 1 second, because I need some of my nectar. Don't worry, it's not my own nectar. It is coffee. I don't know why I said that. I don't want to have said that anymore. Anyway, this consulate situation is something we have to keep an eye on. Now, Germany has its own issues, and we're going to talk about Germany and what Germany's up to and why they're becoming a target most likely anyway. Okay, German ammo stocks run low, would run out of munition in 2 days. So this is a report that just came out recently, right? And basically this was through an interview with Business Insider, where Germany only has 2 days worth of munitions on hand, according to their Parliament Defense Commissioner. Now, I don't know if this is like one of those sly moves where it's like, yeah, we've only got 2 days worth of ammo, so hopefully things don't last that long. Or if it's like, yep, we're super weak and we don't have much to offer, so don't look at us over here while we're actually extremely strong. I don't know. But what I'm understanding from this report that was put out by Business Insider and from the person who's talking about it in the sense of someone who should know this information, they're saying they only have 2 days worth of munitions if they were to end up in a prolonged armed conflict. Okay, so that's not good. 2 days is not very long. How long have we been in conflicts in the past? How long have things lasted in the past? I mean, how long did Vietnam last, right? Then we look at the Afghanistan occupation. We look at Operation Iraqi Freedom, and any of those things, they lasted longer than 2 days, that's for sure. Now, there's a lot of different things that could be going on here. But I want everyone to understand that not only do they only have 2 days of munitions on hand, but they're supposed to have at least 30 to be part of NATO and to be upholding their end of the bargain. So there's a lot of issues going on right now in NATO, right? We know that the people there are upset in the sense of the EU. People are not happy about their energy bill. They're not happy about the fact that they might not be able to keep their families warm during this winter. They're not happy about the fact of the cost of living and the inflation of food and everything else going on over there. So there's a lot of people in Europe that's definitely not being reported on that are very unhappy about the current scenario, regardless of the conflict. They're more worried about themselves and their country than they are about what's happening in Ukraine, which is understandable when they're looking at such a dark winter type scenario. But this is what we're being told. Okay, the German military was running out of weapons that can be sent to Ukraine. They only have 2 days of munitions, and they need 20 billion more euros to acquire enough munitions in order to get back on track to having 30 days worth of munitions. Okay, so why does this matter? What are we talking about? Well, the thing to keep in mind is that even with that being said, they are still moving forward with supplying Germany with more weaponry. Now, that should give you some things to think about. Now, what would you say about this? So this is coming out right now. Report. German IRIS-T SLM air defense system arriving in days. Okay. So this is an air defense system that apparently Germany probably can't afford to be giving to Ukraine right now. However, that's what's going there in a few days. Now, obviously, air defense is huge when it comes to what Ukraine needs in order to defend themselves from Russian airstrikes. And as we've seen, these missile strikes are now causing a huge issue in Kiev as well as in many other cities throughout Ukraine. So this is all happening while Germany is also saying they only have 2 days worth of munitions. So everyone is still stocking Ukraine with what they've got. And I think that there's definitely been sort of a shift here where it's everybody's hoping Ukraine can fight and win this war for them without getting their hands dirty and without having to get personally involved to the point where whatever happens over there is still not necessarily their fault. Whatever fallout there is from it isn't necessarily their fault. But at the end of the day, if they can get a win against Russia in the process without actually having to put any real skin in the game, then everybody has a good time and everybody goes back to being happy, right? So I think there's definitely an optics and a weird perceptional situation going on here. But the other thing to keep in mind is that other countries are seeing this happen, and we know that this is not being looked upon as just an accident. Okay, well, Germany sent some more weapons, and they're not actually sending their army, so I guess we can't do much about it. But here they are sending their weapons. The other thing to keep in mind is that with this constant flow of new munitions being sent over to Ukraine from these countries that are supposedly really low on munitions and supposedly only have 2 days worth if they were to get themselves into an extremely long conflict, well, all I'm saying is maybe Russia's doing just a really good job of depleting everybody's munitions, because at this point in time, it's all getting sent over there. It's all being used. And then these countries are saying, well, you don't have enough. Now, here's something else we need to talk about, okay? And I'll just tell you guys. So I do actually listen to a lot of other channels. And real quick, DSD SWAF, I'm just going to say it that way because it sounds fun. Do you think we are being divided with the conservative versus liberal stuff? Because if we unite, we are too strong to oppress. I mean, yeah, I do. Do I think people have different ideologies and different opinions on how things should work? And maybe some of those things don't really align to the point of having a good relationship. I think we are kind of at that point in many ways as a society. But at the same time, we're being pushed into feeling that level of like hatred and distrust because of the media, because of our politicians, because of the people in power. So, and unfortunately, the idea of a civil situation here is still on the table, especially coming up the midterms, and especially if you look at 2024 presidential election and everything else. That's still a very high possibility and a very sketchy situation that we have to keep in mind while dealing with what's going on the world stage. So, I mean, I don't see any of this getting fixed very easily or overnight at all. So I'm just not happy about it, basically, is the best way to say that. Now, I listened to other channels and I tried to take as much information as I can from them. And I also tried to give credit where credit's due. So I will tell you guys this morning, I was actually listening to Pinball Preparedness. And I basically, understood what he was saying when it came to the fact that all these countries are depleting themselves of their ammunition. They're depleting themselves of their ability to restock it. And a lot of the munitions that they're using are not able to be supplied. They're not able to restock this stuff very quickly. And in fact, what he was talking about today was the idea that some of these Javelin missiles and stuff like that, they take months and months to make a certain 1,000 number of units, and then the amount we've already expended now is surpassed that. So in order to get those back to level playing field zero where we started is going to take months to years depending on what those pieces of equipment were. So that's definitely something you should be considering right now, because not only are we using a bunch of ammunition, and not only are countries like Germany now operating on bare minimum 2 days worth of ammo, but we also have a situation where we can't even create those munitions quickly enough to get them back in stock within a reasonable amount of time. So yeah, if you wanted to look at it as Russia getting everybody to drain all their munitions and supply before they actually do anything extremely malicious, then that might be something you could definitely say. I don't know how else to put it. I mean, it could definitely look that way if you want it to be that way. So yeah, I'm 1970s on quality right now, John P. Sometimes the camera just likes to do its thing. I don't know. I've been having weird internet lately. I'm just throwing it out there. So I don't know why, but things have been strange. Okay. Now, another thing I want to mention based on that statement is just so you guys know, I live in North Dakota. I live in silo country. I am not downwind from the silos. I am, west of the silos. So that's a good thing in my, for my situation. But at the same time, I live near, Minot Air Force Base, and there's a lot of activity in my area. And what I'll tell you guys, at least just from my personal experience, and then this is just something for you to digest, with everything happening lately, there's been a huge uptick in air activity and air traffic in my area, like right above my house, right? I mean, I'm talking like vapor trails all day long, all over the place. And I'm watching, aircraft flying back and forth, and none of it at all shows up on any of the flight trackers. There's no transponder, information being sent out. So do with that what you will, but I will tell you just from where I live, it seems like air traffic has picked up quite a bit. So, some people have said, well, that could be a response to Hurricane Ian, and there's a lot of supplies and stuff being sent out that way and everything else. That's all fine and dandy, but none of it's on flight tracker either. So there's also that kind of a situation in place. But things I just pay attention to and keep an eye on, and that's something I've noticed. So I figured I would share it with you all. Now, one of the things that Pinball mentioned that I thought was worth talking about today as well, and it's definitely something to remind ourselves of, is that there's another country who's just been sitting it out this whole time. Okay, so China signals disinterest in providing weapons to Russia for brutal Ukraine campaign. This was March 14th, right? So China is just still stocked. China's still got all their stuff. They're not depleting themselves through this conflict. They're not depleting themselves at all. And they're not really depleting themselves when it comes to what they've been doing with Taiwan and stuff lately either. They're just doing some drills and everything else. But we have countries like Germany, one of the wealthiest countries in Europe, if not the wealthiest. I'm not even sure at this point who's the most wealthy, right? But all I'm trying to say is they only have 2 days worth of munitions, according to this report. China hasn't even spent a single round of ammunition on this conflict that we know of. Of course, back alley deals and everything else could always exist. But all I'm trying to remind you guys of is that there's this other major superpower who's a lot better friends with Russia than anyone else in the sense of being a superpower that hasn't had to even supply a single Norinco. You know what I mean? So I want everyone to keep that in mind because there's a lot going on right now. There's a lot of different pieces being moved around this chessboard. And one of them hasn't had to really expend any of their pawns or anything along those lines yet. So I just want everyone to keep that in mind and understand that there could be a lot of relevance to this whole bullet sponge scenario that we're witnessing. Okay. All right. Now, countries being drug into this. Well, we just talked about Germany. Okay. Now we also know what's going on with the whole Belarus situation. Okay. So Belarus, which is north of Ukraine, announces a joint regional group of forces with Russia as country's military gears up to join the war. Okay. So this is being reported differently from different outlets. Some outlets are saying, is Belarus about to invade? Some outlets are reporting that, Russian troops are on their way to Belarus. And then some of these outlets, the Scotsman is saying that they are gearing up to join the war. They are on their way. They just have to get everything put into place first. Okay. So we're talking about multiple countries getting involved, which everyone hoped this whole thing would stay in, one conflict between Russia and Ukraine. We knew that wasn't going to happen. People who thought it was going to happen just, I guess, weren't reading the room at the time. But we know someone else is going to get involved at some point, no matter what, because that's just what's happening. The longer this thing goes on for, the more likely other people get involved. And Belarus looks like they might be the first one to step into the ring, and tag team it. So Belarus gets involved. Now we're having a 2-on-1 situation, which we're already talking about Ukraine being the underdog. You tell me what NATO and the Western world's reaction to that will be, but that's what we're expecting to see here, okay? Now, the interesting part is that basically Lukashenko, right, who is the president of Belarus, is saying that Kiev is planning an attack on Belarus. So they have to do this because they got intelligence that Kiev is planning an attack, and because of that, they have to go get ready to defend themselves, right? So you can play this out however you want, right? When it comes to linguistics, when it comes to semantics, you can use language to make anything turn out the way you want it to. And right now, it looks like Belarus is saying that they're the victim, right? And that seems to work really well in politics. It seems to work really well for certain groups when it comes to people being victimized and claiming to be victimized and everything else. So I guess we're seeing that on the world stage now in the sense of war and reasoning for getting into a war. And don't forget, and I hate having to reference this, but I always have to bring this up because it is just part of our history. Don't forget that there was credible early intelligence of the Pearl Harbor attack from Japan back in 1941, and yet it was allowed to happen because that credible intelligence was ignored. Whether or not that was purposeful, you can tell me in the chat. But at the end of the day, Pearl Harbor happened, and then us, the victim, finally had to get involved in the war, which then created America's entry into World War II. Okay, so I'll always remember that as part of our history and part of what gets us into wars. I mean, Gulf of Tonkin comes to mind sometimes. Anyway, so let's see here. I got a couple of people here in the chat. I just want to get to everybody. Risky Krisky is here as well. Ron Stryker is saying hello to Milkmaid. Let's see. Van City Prepper, hello, good to see you. Prepping by Faith, good to see you as well. Let's see. We've got Sergeant Rudy 0311. And Belarus has a standing army of less than 50,000 troops. And either way, 50,000 more troops coming in from your northern border while you're already fighting Russia is probably not good. So regardless of size, it's still an issue, and it's still another country getting involved with this conflict. And the more they get involved, the more precarious the scenario becomes, which means the closer to actual full-on World War III we are at. And here's the thing you always have to keep in mind. We're not going to actually be told it's World War III until it's like super, super obvious, right? The Rios 7018, what's up? Keith Wingo, draft imminent. I mean, I think if we get into a full-on, multi-front conflict, it's almost inevitable because right now recruitment numbers are so low, and we kicked out how many servicemen and women because of a certain, medical requirement. So, yeah, I mean, it seems likely. Okay, now we're talking about Belarus. Well, we also know that according to these reports that Ukraine has been dealing with that whole Belarus situation because they're worried that Belarus might show up. So massive Ukrainian blast crippled the border bridges with Belarus. Okay. Now this is from a Lebanese news agency, right? So it's interesting when you try to find this information, especially if you use like a mainstream browser or search engine like Google. Of course, there's always DuckDuckGo and there's many other options out there. But it's interesting when you'll find a story like this from a Lebanese news outlet, but you won't necessarily find it from mainstream United States media, but you can if you were to look in alternative places. So I'm just throwing it out there. So when you're doing your research and you're trying to find things, understand where you're getting your information from and understand what the bias might be, and then use that while you're digesting the information. A Lebanese news source is definitely going to be more credible than, let's say, a Russian news source would be, and more credible than a Ukrainian news source. However, maybe less credible than some other news sources that exist. So there's just things to keep in mind when it comes to what the information is and what it's putting out there now. So like I said, everything's hearsay when it comes to this fog of war situation. If you're not on the ground looking at it with your own two eyes, you can't necessarily fully believe everything you're being told. But this is what's being reported by a news agency in a different country, at least. Ukrainian forces are destroying nearly all bridges along Belarus border, as per chairman of the State Border Committee of Belarus, Anatoly Lapo. Okay, chairman of the State Border Committee of Belarus, Anatoly Lapo, said Sunday that Ukrainian forces have destroyed nearly all bridges and mined the roads along the Belarus border. Today, almost all border bridges have been blown up, and automobile and railway border routes are completely mined. Okay. The official has also stressed that Ukrainian forces have fortified the border to the point of putting anti-tank mines in 3 rows on the roads. All right. So this is what's being reported. Now, is that because Ukraine has intelligence that an incoming Belarusian invasion is on its way? Or is it because they're taking the extra precautions due to the fact that it's a likely entry point for Russia, even if it's just their troops, which, like I said, reports are also rolling in that many troops are coming in to Belarus from Russia in cattle cars on railway. So there's a lot happening right now. And this is just another example of Belarus possibly getting into this conflict. And the more countries that get involved, the more other countries that have to get involved, then the more World War III really becomes. And that is not what I want to have happen. All right. Let's see. Texas Gals Prepping. Glad he made it. Chief is here. Let's see. Bobo World. I hope they're purdy. I don't know what we're talking about, but you guys do your thing. All right. And this chat is always a good time. make sure you guys are at the very least, trying to do a little bit of networking through the chat. I think it's important. I think that it's a good idea to establish communication. Even if you're not in each other's immediate locale, it can still give you a good reference. It can still give you good information. And honestly, like, I learn a lot from the people in our community, and I have a good time with it. So if you guys aren't already, please jump into the Discord. I think it's a good idea. Thank you for posting that Exile Reviews. I will double up on that as well. And our Discord server is mostly for networking, although there is some interesting conversation from time to time. And sometimes it gets a little frisky and we have to cool it off. But you know what? I still have fun with it, so it's fine. Now, and plus, people are allowed to disagree. Don't forget, if you put yourself in an echo chamber of people who always agree with everything that you say, you're going to find yourself not being good at argument, okay? And honestly, debate is an important ability to have, because in an SHTF scenario, if diplomacy ever becomes a valid asset when it comes to maybe making peace between two different communities, or when it becomes a situation where you have to get a large amount of a community on your side when it comes to being, righteous in what it is you're trying to accomplish, a lot of things go into play when it comes to debate and diplomacy and having to work with people of a differing opinion. And if you don't have any experience with that, because you're only surrounded by people who always agree with everything that you say or everything that you do, it might be a detriment to you at some point in time. I'm just throwing it out there. Things to consider, okay? Now, let's see here. Now, and I do want you guys to know I am having a good time with these conversations, but I also have to keep in mind that we as a community, we don't want to scare ourselves to death. So this is not to scare us. This is to be aware and to understand how close we are to having to actually rely on the things, the skills, the preps, everything related to preparedness that we've put together in the time that we've used wisely, right? And that timing can be a big deal, because sometimes timing is survival, right? Escaping a wildfire is timing, right? And staying out of a dangerous area is timing, right? So you can go down one street at 5 o'clock in the afternoon and everything's fine. Go down that same street at 11 o'clock at night and you get mugged and possibly killed. So you have to understand what's happening around you and understand what that timing and timeline looks like, so you have a better chance of trying to get through it the best you can. That's just what I want to throw out there. Now, other countries are being drug into this, and some of them are being drug in with the use of their equipment, right? Like, NATO giving Ukraine all this stuff, and Poland wants nukes, and everybody wants F-22s and all this stuff. But don't forget, Russia is doing the same thing. Russia uses self-destructing drones from Iran in strikes near Kiev, okay? Understand that Iran is providing Russia with some of these drones, and we know some of that drone technology was reverse engineered from captured equipment through the Americans' campaigns in that region, as well as their conflicts with Israel. So we know that, yes, now that Iran is supplying Russia with some of these weapons, now they have become part of that list of people that are a problem. And that creates another point of interest in the world for where this conflict can spill over to. And if Iran is working with Russia and this whole thing spills into a World War III scenario, what do you think that does with countries like Israel? What do you think that does with countries in the Middle East in general? And how do you think this affects West versus East in the sense of relations? So this is spilling over more and more and more. And with Iran supplying these kamikaze drones, it's only going to get worse in the sense of outside involvement, right? Now, there are also other countries that are causing problems. And we know they're going to keep causing problems. North Korea, don't you love them? All right, their missile tests are to simulate striking the South with nuclear weapons, okay? Now, the thing to remember about North Korea, and I want everybody to keep this in mind, they are the dog on China's leash, right? So they aren't doing this without some permission. All right. And I say that because they rely on China to literally stay alive. Their population is starving. They rely on, forced labor and everything else in order to keep their economy and their military moving forward. So without China's financial and economic support, they can't move forward. They would literally eventually shrivel up and die. Right. So that being said, we also now understand that China is okay with some of the provocations going on in this region. Now, you can speculate as to why, but the thing to keep in mind is that North Korea is launching ballistic missiles. They're shooting them into the Sea of Japan, sometimes over Japan, and they are now saying that what they're doing is literally them simulating nuclear strikes on South Korea, which we would get involved if that happened. Now, that's a lot of different fronts, and the whole North Korean thing is an interesting one too, because think of this, and this is just kind of a thought exercise for you guys to kind of keep in mind, okay? But if North Korea were to start a conflict with the South, and they know that the United States is South Korea's ally, and we would be forced to defend them and to bring our military might to that region in order to defend South Korea. If China can still wash their hands of the situation and say, look, North Korea did this, we had nothing to do with it, sorry, we'll do what we can, but we're not, we're their ally, so we're not going to fight you, but we're also not going to stop the situation from happening. North Korea becomes yet another bullet sponge, right? Another country that starts wasting supplies, okay? And I'm not saying wasting supplies as if Ukraine's wasting supplies. I understand that Ukraine needs to defend themselves, and I don't care what country you are. And you can look at this from any perspective you want. But if someone invades you, you have a right to fight back, regardless of whether or not it's for righteous intentions or whatever, right? It just is what it is, okay? Someone invades the United States right now, I have the right to fight them, and so do you, and I expect you to. So let's hope that never happens. But what I'm trying to say is that this is how things work. So look, North Korea attacks, we have to then go support South Korea. Suddenly, ammunition's being used, supplies are being used, economic impact is had, and we are now on a different front, okay? Then things start happening over in Europe. NATO gets involved. How does that play out? Now you're spread thin, and you're not even dealing directly with the superpower who's hiding behind North Korea and Russia, right? They're basically blocked in saying, oh, that's not us because Russia's doing that thing and North Korea's doing this thing, and we're still here not spending a single bullet, right? So keep this in mind because there's a lot of interesting things that could occur during this situation, especially when you consider the Taiwan scenario, because it would be really difficult for the United States to get into a full-on conflict with North Korea, who I believe has the world's second largest standing army. Maybe it's the fourth. You guys tell me in the chat. I don't want to look it up right this second, but I think it's like the second largest standing army. They have like 2 million people in their army. But that being said, Cowboy in the Jungle, good to see you. And I like that name a lot. It's really interesting. Kind of scary though too, as if like you're probably like a nighttime stripper or something. But I get it. It's cool. I can see the theme there. So good work on that. Now, what I'm trying to say is that if North Korea drags the United States into a conflict, and then China makes a move on Taiwan, how does that go down? Where do you decide to focus your attention, okay? And don't forget how the whole Taiwan thing is going, because we're going to talk about that right now. Taiwan is being converted into a weapons warehouse or an ammunition depot or whatever you want to call it, all right? So this is from 5 days ago or 4 days ago. I don't know. I can't count. U.S. plans to stockpile enough weapons in Taiwan to hold out during Chinese blockade, okay? So stockpile your weapons in Taiwan, then you don't have to transport them there in case conflict breaks out. But how are you going to man them and how are you going to supply them if you have to suddenly take all your resources to, I don't know, Korea? So there's a lot of things that are happening right now that are putting everyone in very precarious scenarios. And at the end of the day, and this is just my opinion, as I knock my microphone over and tell it how much I don't like it because it doesn't have good reverb control, at the end of the day, who is gaining the most from this right this second? At least, let's not say gaining the most, but who's able to save the most resources and expend the least amount while all this starts going on? It seems to be China. And that's just what it looks like to me. And maybe they're playing Russia. I don't know. You tell me. Maybe they made a deal. Hey, you do this, then North Korea is going to do that. And then while everyone's wasting their resources on those two conflicts, we'll finally make our strike. And then we'll guarantee that we'll buy all of our oil and all of our natural gas from you for this many years or whatever it is, right? There's a lot of things that can happen here, but I'm just throwing things out there because we also know there's a huge push to remove the US dollar from the petrodollar. So it would be very interesting for these countries to get together, make these plans, and create a huge resource deficit. And then, like I said, and all credit to Pinball Preparedness for bringing this up, it would take years for us to rebuild the stockpiles of munitions that we're currently using. You can't just make Javelin rockets overnight. You can't just, make HIMARS launchers overnight. That's not how this whole thing works. You have to literally have a huge amount of infrastructure and a huge amount of resources in place in order to start producing these things in mass. And even then, you can't do them in mass. You literally have to do them with what's allowed, basically, based on the infrastructure you have in place. So all these things have to be considered. And just so you guys know, based on this, okay, the U.S. is planning on stockpiling mass quantities of mobile weapons to enable Taiwan to hold out for help in the event of a Chinese attack and blockade. Here you go, Taiwan. Hopefully you can wait for us to get there, right? The New York Times cited U.S. officials as stating that plans are in the works to turn Taiwan into a giant weapons depot to ensure adequate supplies during a Chinese blockade in preparation for an invasion. Taiwan and the U.S. are taking lessons from the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and one of them is that Taiwan will need much greater store of weaponry, as it will be much more easily cut off from aid than Ukraine, which shares land borders with 4 NATO countries. Okay, so you understand what's happening here. They're literally taking tons of munitions and stockpiling them on an island that could most likely be relatively easily invaded without U.S. intervention, which would then be inherited by the country that invaded. Which, by the way, how's the Taliban doing now with all that amazing weapons that we stockpiled there? So, look, they clearly can't fly Blackhawks, but that's a different story, okay? All I'm trying to say is that it does seem that there's a strategic reasoning behind a lot of this expenditure. And our politicians are more than happy to spend the money, to send the munitions, to do all the things, because their number one goal is to get reelected. And at the end of the day, it makes them look good, like they're heroes and they're trying to do something for the greater good. But at the end of the day, they're doing what's based on popular support in the voter polls, right? So if their voting base says, we need to do something for Ukraine, that's what the politicians are doing, whether or not it's in our best interest for national security and whether or not it's in our best interest for long-term sustainability during a multi-front global conflict, which is what this is starting to look like it's going to become. And I'm not just saying that for the audacity of it, right? Oh, if you say it's World War III, everybody, wants to watch your video and all that stuff. No, I mean, I'm sharing my opinions and my feelings with you guys because I'm a prepper. Look, I look at these things, and do I have a level of paranoia that might be greater than the average person? Of course I do. It's part of the game. That's why we do what we do. But you know what? That paranoia is also a very good, valuable asset because it forces me to act. It forces me to actually prepare because I actually believe things can happen rather than being old Larry head in the sand over, 10 miles east saying, this guy's crazy. Nothing's going to happen. And even if it does, I'll sit on my hill with my bolt action and take them out one at a time from 1,000 yards. Okay. So, which don't ask why that conversation comes up so often in my friend pool, but it does. Okay. All right. Now, okay, Alberta Prepper says you should check out the Lotus Eaters. They have a doc showing that the Afghans are flying those Blackouts and other military equipment daily. And I don't doubt it because you know what? When I get when I got my suppressor, I was like shooting this every day now, right? So yeah, you get new toys, you want to test them out. I get it. So that's what's going to happen. The Bomb Dog, good to see you. Sean Samuels, hello. My first guitar was a Hondo 2 with a Teisco amp. Okay. Well, my first bass was a PVP bass. So there you go. All right. Now, why is our media, why are the people in charge lying to us? Okay. They're lying to us about a lot of things. So right now they're lying to us about the probability of this conflict. Now, one thing you should consider, and this is always how it works with our press, if they're telling you nothing's going to happen, or if they're just moving on with the story, that's most likely when things are getting bad. So be aware of that, because right now what I'm seeing in the media is tons and tons of celebrity gossip. I'm seeing a lot of paying attention to like singular crimes happening within, small cities and towns where it's like, oh, this guy shot someone that one time, or, oh, this lady's missing. And I get it. It's important to try to help each other, and we need to pay attention to what's happening in our towns and our cities. But there's a lot of attention being paid to these, on the grand scheme of things, trivial items. And I don't like saying that because someone being kidnapped is not trivial to them or the people who love them. But on the grand scale of what's happening in the world right now, it's rather trivial. And so they'll push a story about North Korea firing ballistic missiles over Japan down to like number 8. And the top stories are going to be, Tucker Carlson's interview with Kanye, right? So like all these things are happening. Celebrity gossip run amok. That's when I get the most concerned. And that's what we're seeing a lot of right this second. And we will not be told that we're actually in World War III until literally there is wartime propaganda pamphlets that come out that say, what you need to know about those pesky Russians. And here's the problem with the North Korean dictator. And watch out for China and them trying to do this, right? So we're literally watching it all begin right now. And our country is like literally lying to us about it. Our media has no idea what's going on, or they're literally lying to us about it. And even when it comes to our economy, nobody seems to be willing to just say what it is. So here's an article from literally today, and this is what bothers me, okay? U.S. economy is headed for a recession in a few months. JP Morgan's Jamie Dimon. Okay. Look, man. I don't care who you are. I know Jamie Dimon's a big wig when it comes to Wall Street and financials and everything else.
I'm suspicious of discounts, so I'm like,
what do you mean a few months, man? Like, I don't care what the indicators are. I don't care anymore what the graphs say. I don't care what different indicators have to be, checked off the list in order for things to qualify as an actual recession. We are in the crapper economically right now. I can't even tell you how ridiculous it is when I have to go get like a full tank of gas and a trip to the grocery store, like it wrecks my entire week. I'm like, oh, yes, I'm not getting that other thing I wanted to get, right? Or prepping food is like, okay, if I add this, bag of rice or bag of beans to the grocery cart today, I guess I have to leave off some of those, other things that I usually would have gotten as a kid's like, or whatever it is. It's like these sacrificial decisions are now just a daily part of life because of how expensive things are becoming. Do I want to go to some of the excellent medical and firearms training that my buddies at Garrison Readiness Group are doing out, towards the Bismarck area? Yeah, of course I do. Do I want to make that drive and spend $180? I mean, I want to, but can I afford to? Like, things are getting tough, and they're still talking about recession as if it's a few months away. Oh man, we're almost there. What is going on? So when I see this kind of stuff, I just can't even deal with it. Like, they are trying their hardest to be what? Optimistic? Like, is optimism part of reporting? Is optimism part of facts? Like, no, it's not. And so, like I said, I'm done with indicators. I'm done with a recession checklist. We're not only in a recession, we're on our way to something much worse. Okay. And you know what fixes a lot of these problems is conflict. I know I say it a lot, but it's just true. And if you have a failing presidency, which, like, we do, I don't know what else to tell everybody. We do. And honestly, I wouldn't say that just because somebody's of a certain political party or whatever. I mean, we have the oldest president that's ever been elected who acts his age. And we have corruption at the highest level. We have a vice president that doesn't know what country they're in or what country we're fighting or anything like that. And then we have these, high up State Department officials that aren't fixing any of the problems. They're just talking about them constantly. So we're in a bad situation, and there's no solutions being presented. So at the end of the day, we're in trouble no matter what happens with this whole conflict. But you know what? This conflict is getting really spicy. And I say that in the way that I don't want to have to say it. If you don't think this is going to get worse, you probably said that, 8 months ago, right? You probably said, nah, nothing's going to happen, right? If you don't think this conflict's getting worse and getting more people involved, you probably said that 6 months ago, okay? Back when the invasion, first occurred and everything was starting to become more of a thing back in March and stuff, you were probably sitting there like, yeah, but I mean, this is as far as it's going to go, right? And I'm sure many of you back then, and myself included in many ways, thought it'd be over by now, right? Well, Russia's huge, has a giant military, has nuclear weapons. I guess this is going to be over pretty soon. Here we are in October, and it's still going strong. In fact, it's escalating, dragging other countries into it, reducing the resources and supplies of NATO members as well as the United States, especially economically. And at the same time, we still have the sleeper of China laying in the background going, we haven't really had to do much. So I want all of you to keep all of this going. I'm just saying, keep prepping. It's not getting better. I want to say it is. My life would be a little bit less stressful, and I could focus on the fun stuff again a little bit more, right? But this is like a real thing, okay? And I know it can be redundant. I know it can be difficult to listen to preppers on a daily basis saying, the end is near, and today's the day. I get it. I get that can be a little bit burdensome, and that's why I hope you guys understand when I make the content I do here on this channel, I try to sprinkle things in. I'm not trying to constantly beat the war drum, right? That's why I was like, hey, Mylar food bags. How about this, right? Very popular video? Not really. You know why? Because people have that figured out already, or they don't, and it's something that they're going to look for if they need it, and they won't look for if they don't. I totally get that. But I'm not trying to constantly be that reminder of in your face, the world's going to end tomorrow guy. But at the same time, I'm also going to always be logical and realistic about the threat level. And I'm going to share my feelings and my opinion with you all as to where I think those things are, where they're sitting right now, and how dire the situation might be. And you know what? At the end of the day, I can be wrong. So always do your own research, figure out your thought process as to how you analyze these situations, and then take my information and take what I tell you with a grain of salt, because there's always a chance that I'm just flat out wrong. Okay. I do what I can when it comes to research, and I do what I can when it comes to listening to other people's opinions and perspectives. But I don't want to sit here and tell you that I'm the know-all guy, right? Even when it comes to preps, even when it comes to the things I'm passionate about, doesn't always mean I know every single thing about them. When I make mistakes, people tell me in the comments and everything else. And you know what? That's like the best part about running this YouTube channel. Hey, man, you better quit chicken winging. You look like an idiot and you're going to get your elbow shot off. And I'm like, you know what? Yeah, I was chicken winging pretty bad. I'm really upset about all those years shooting M1As. Thanks, California. You know, let's be honest, though. If you're in California and you want a semi-auto rifle that doesn't have any of the weird neutered stuff going on, it is hard to pass up the M1As and the Mini 14s and stuff, because they're just still stock, other than not being allowed to have a flash hider and other than only having 10-round magazines. But everything else, you have to get all these weird workarounds, and then you run into, weird issues. It just is what it is. But that's just my opinion. That's why I got stuck with that chicken wing for so long. So fixing it, I promise. Now, B's nuts. I appreciate that. Thanks for the kind words. Let's see. Prep Rebel, you're not wrong. Every one of us makes mistakes. I agree with that. And I also want everyone to keep in mind that if you are doing things like, I don't care what it is, training when it comes to first aid, like I was doing tourniquet training the other day, and that's why I made the video about the Chinese tourniquets, because I wanted to test out, my tourniquet skills. And I knew I had all these sketchy tourniquets that I had ordered a long, long time ago when I didn't know any better. And I thought, well, I'm just going to use these and see if any of them break or what happens. And of course, the one I shot on video did. So, I was training and I filmed myself doing these things, because you can see if you're doing something wrong, and that's why I like filming myself doing shooting, because I can see that I, didn't do proper, safety manipulation, or I didn't, have a good shoulder weld, or, all those things. Like, you can actually analyze yourself. So I think even if you don't want to start a YouTube channel or anything, at least, at the very least, just record yourself sometimes doing things, right? And if you guys want to know, yeah, tourniquet training can definitely beat you up a little bit. So it'll get you, but definitely worth it if you want speed and you want consistency. And if you don't know how to stage a tourniquet, it's super easy, but just make sure you look up how to, because I think it's a good idea to have all your tourniquets properly staged. And until I took Refuge Medical's first aid training course, their Stop the Bleed course, none of my tourniquets were properly staged. So all honesty, you have to have someone tell you sometimes when you're doing something wrong, or else you might just keep doing the wrong thing always. All right. And I will say, if you have an opportunity to take Refuge Medical Stop the Bleed class, I don't even care if you hate Bear Independent, if you don't like him at all, which I know his personality is not always, in sync with other people's. I met him. He was a nice guy, and we had a good conversation. But what I will say, if you hate him, which I know some people do, even if you don't like him, take the class. I'm telling you, it was a really, really good class. And man, my tourniquet skills are like way better than they were. And my confidence in using some of that equipment is way higher now, just from that one class. And honestly, you are 100% more likely to use a tourniquet than your concealed carry pistol. So I carry both, right? Because A, I can stop bleeding if I have to make someone bleed. And B, if I'm the one bleeding because of having to try to stop someone from making me bleed and they were still able to, hopefully I can stop that bleeding to happen. But B, C, or whatever number we're on now, triangle, the most likely thing you're going to find is like a car accident. And you know what happens in car accidents? People bleed. You know what doesn't happen in car accidents? Shootouts. So honestly, like, I love carrying a tourniquet on me now all the time. And in all honesty, I think that has more of a probability of being used than a concealed carry firearm. And I carry both all the time. Don't get me wrong. But I'm just saying that, like, I have a feeling like I'll have more of a reason to use a tourniquet at some point in my life than I will a firearm. That's just how it seems to be. So that being said, let's see. Sarah Pack has a weird feeling about PayPal too. Yeah, PayPal has had a weird situation going on where they've changed their terms of service, and they're worried about supporting platforms that push misinformation and stuff like that. So that's at least something I would check into. But there's a lot of issues going on in the world right now when it comes to tech. And there always has been. But you have all kinds of tech platforms that are either allowing or supporting inappropriate content. You have censorship. You have everything going on. So it's really hard to find places that are like 100% legit, because a lot of people tell you, well, you should move to like Rumble or BitChute or anything like that. But when you really get down into the nitty gritty, okay, so these platforms are extremely expensive to operate. I don't know if you understand like how it all works, but like operating the servers required to store billions of video files and be able to play them back instantly at the click of a button is not a cheap process. And for these other platforms to try to compete with YouTube, it's very expensive. So how do you think they make their money? I'm just going to let you I'll let that sit with you, because honestly, I think a lot of people are quick to jump to another platform because they think it's more freedom of speech and everything else, which a lot of times it is, but it still comes with the same baggage, and that's really what you should consider. Now, let's see here. We have Ken Masters here. I'm glad to see you. I'm not sure what you guys are talking about, but I like saying hello. Tactical Prepper. Tactical Prepper says, "You don't have thermal, you're dead." I don't think that's the exact quote from Garand Thumb, but there will be a thermal video coming out on this channel in the relative future. I am working with an ATN thermal monocular right now, which I'm pretty excited about. But there's a lot of reasons why it might be a good idea to have something that can give you some of that capability. Because at the end of the day, like Garand Thumb said, like if they can see you and you can't see them, then it's over already, right? So just keep that in mind. Let's see. Jonathan Gardner, good to see you. Jonathan Gardner says, "Who does not like bear?" And you'll find a lot of people don't. So, but it's just personalities and it's the way people present themselves, and not everybody is going to mesh, and that's just how it works. Just some dude, who would win in a race, Magic Prepper running or Angry Prepper on his Vespa? I'm not going to try to admit that I'm faster than a Vespa, but I am pretty good at running now. I run more than I've ever ran in my entire life. So if you haven't ran full speed in recent history, just do that. Like go outside and literally run as fast as you can and find out what that threshold is and find out how that feels afterward. Because I was running drills the other day on my range. I have a 100-yard range, so I was running full speed to 50 yards, so it's 2 shots, full speed to 50 yards, 2 more shots from cover, full speed up to 20 yards, so another 30-yard dash, and then 4 shots from cover. And by the end of doing that like 6 or 7 times, because I wanted to actually get good at it, I had some issues with my legs after. So, all right, now. Let's see. Richard Rattano, good to see you. You're always hanging out. I appreciate that. And then Nancy Seeleman, good to see you too. Join your local CERT, Community Emergency Response Team. Free training and many great trainings and other things too. And honestly, Nancy Seeleman, yes, that is a good idea. Your Community Emergency Response Team is a good thing to join. It's a good place to network too. And people, before we run, the end of this chat, because we are at the hour mark now, what I want to mention is everyone always asks, community-wise, how do I build a prepper community? How do I meet people who are like-minded? How do I get involved with another group? And I will tell you that something like CERT is a good place to start, because you'll meet other people who have at least that concept in mind, emergency response, right? Regardless of the prepper aspect of it, you have people that might have qualified training. You might have people who have the right mindset, and they might be good assets to have if things really go south. The other thing to keep in mind is that most of my preparedness acquaintances have come from shooting. I don't know what else to say. Taking firearms courses and going to shooting ranges and hanging out at gun stores and stuff. Like that's where I've met most of the guys who are actually willing to do prepper stuff, And look, I think firearms and preparedness go hand in hand. And I think that there's a level of enthusiasm when it comes to shooting and shooting sports and stuff like that, that is harder to come by in other aspects of preparedness. When that enthusiasm can then be applied to other aspects, I think that that's very valuable, right? And like, for example, one of the guys that's in my immediate area, big into preparedness, big time, ham radio guy. He's helping me get all set up on all the equipment and all the information. And he's a good resource that I can hit up anytime. Just like, hey man, what's up with this antenna or whatever, right? So that's great. But what's cool is that, he's maybe not as knowledgeable in the firearms aspect as I am, but he's definitely a good guy. So I recently, helped him do some work on some of his projects. And then that's kind of a trade of information. So he's going to help me out with my radio setup and, just learning ham in general. And then I'm helping him out with some of his, AR builds and stuff like that, where it's mutual and we both have, our level of expertise to offer to each other. So that's where I meet people. And honestly, I think it's a good place to start. So keep everybody in that. How much 9mm to stock away for a Glock 19? Peanuts asks. I mean, how much can you? Because I'll tell you what, it's not always about how much you can stock. I think that there's a good numbers to shoot for, but I think the main thing you should say is how much ammo do I need to get proficient with my Glock 19 and then still have ammo left over to use if I need it, right? And that's actually a harder question to answer sometimes, because I'll tell you what, ever since I got a shooting range on my own property, I need more ammo. If any guys, anyone here, works for an ammo company, hit me up because maybe we can work something out. But things are getting expensive, let's just say. So, but all right, look, Brian Keith Prepper said, "Where'd you get that cool Fallout Boy piece behind you on your wall?" Now, so everybody knows it's not Fallout Boy like the band. Okay, we're talking about Fallout, the video game series, but it's a Pit Boy. Right. Basically, I think I got it on like Amazon. So it was just like, I just searched like neon Fallout, like, because I like the game series. And I also just thought it was kind of applicable to the theme here. And I think it's cool. So, and it changes colors too. So if you want it to be other colors, it can do that. But yeah, I think that's where I found it. And then honestly, if you guys have anything else to leave, let me know, because we all have to learn from each other. So any comments are welcome. I appreciate you guys, but I do need to let everybody go because it's already past that time. And real quick, Joel Silva says, Luma lied about the power grid in Puerto Rico. Okay. And now that's something that I've discussed before, where not here on the channel, but personally, where Puerto Rico has issues with their power grid. And they were reporting that they had, a huge percentage of it back up and running after Fiona hit, right? Fiona, am I saying the right one? For some reason, off the top of my head, I'm like, is that correct? Anyway, but at the end of the day, they have been very corrupt in the past. And now what Joel's saying is that they lied about how many people actually had power back on. So keep that in mind, because that can happen too. Things can sound like they're fine, and they're not, because somebody said they were who should have been credible. So all those things, very, very relevant. Thank you guys so much. Make sure you do what you can to get prepared. This clock is ticking, I'm telling you. Like, this is legitimately getting closer and closer to like that thing we don't want to have happen. So I'm going to keep doing things as usual, but I'm going to have a heightened state of awareness in the process and stay alert, because we got to keep each other posted on what's happening out there, and a lot is happening. Thank you guys so much. That's going to be it for Magic Prepper.